Have you ever noticed that some people would rather drown than reach for a hand? They're struggling visibly, undeniably struggling, but when you offer help, they smile and say, "I'm fine." They'll carry every burden alone. They'll work until they collapse. They'll suffer in silence rather than admit they need something they can't provide for themselves. And if you ask them why, they'll give you reasonable explanations. "I don't want to be a burden. I can handle it. Everyone has their own problems." But here's something strange. If you look into their eyes when they're refusing help, you won't see strength. You'll see fear. Because the person who never asks for help isn't being strong. They're protecting themselves from something they believe is more dangerous than suffering alone. So what are they really afraid of? And what does it cost them to never let anyone in? Let's start with what everyone sees. You never ask for help, ever. You carry groceries in one trip, even when your arms are shaking. You work through illness. You solve your own problems, fix your own mistakes, handle your own crises. When people offer assistance, you deflect. "I've got it. Don't worry about me. I'm fine." And people admire you for it. They call you independent, capable, strong. They say they wish they could be more like you. They don't notice the weight you're carrying or the toll it's taking. But you notice. You notice the exhaustion that never quite goes away. The loneliness that sits in your chest like a stone. The moments when you're drowning and people are standing right there, but you can't bring yourself to say the words, "I need help." Because here's the truth. You're not refusing help because you don't need it. You're refusing it because needing feels dangerous. And this is where it gets interesting. Psychologically, the inability to ask for help isn't about pride or stubbornness, though it might look that way from the outside. It's about trust, or rather, the fundamental lack of it. Research in attachment theory shows that our early relationships shape our beliefs about whether other people are safe, reliable, available. If you grew up in an environment where asking for help led to disappointment, punishment, or shame, your brain learned a simple equation. Vulnerability equals danger. But here's what's fascinating. You didn't just learn not to ask. You learned that needing itself is a weakness, a flaw, something to be hidden at all costs. And so you became someone who doesn't need. Or at least someone who appears not to need. Someone who handles everything alone, who never shows weakness, who never gives anyone the opportunity to let you down. Because if you never ask, you can never be refused. If you never need, you can never be disappointed. If you never reach out, you can never discover that no one's there to catch you. But the truth is, you're drowning. And everyone around you thinks you're swimming. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you let someone help you with something that actually mattered? Not holding a door or passing you the salt, but something real. Something that required you to admit you couldn't do it alone. If you're struggling to remember, that's telling. Because here's what's really happening. You've built an entire identity around self-sufficiency. You're the person who has it together. The one others lean on. The helper, never the helped. And that identity feels safe. It gives you purpose. It keeps you in control, but it's also a prison. Because the walls you built to keep disappointment out are the same walls keeping connection from getting in. Let's talk about what this really is. When you refuse to ask for help, you're not just managing your current situation. You're reenacting an old wound. Maybe you grew up in a home where asking for help is met with anger, where your needs were dismissed as dramatic, attention-seeking, too much. So you learned, keep it to yourself, handle it alone, don't be a burden. Or maybe your caregivers were physically present, but emotionally unavailable. You asked for help and technically received it, but it came with resentment, with sighs, with the clear message that you were an inconvenience. So you learned, it's better not to ask than to ask and feel like you a problem. Or maybe you asked once, at a crucial moment, and the person you trusted let you down, failed you, disappeared, and the pain of that betrayal was so acute that you made a decision. Never again. Never be that vulnerable again. Never give anyone that much power over you again. And this is where it gets complex. Because what started as a protective strategy has become a fundamental belief. I am only acceptable when I am self-sufficient. I am only lovable when I need nothing. Psychologists call this counterdependency, a defensive independence that masks a deep longing for connection. You present as needing no one, but underneath you're starving for someone to see through the facade. For someone to notice you're struggling and insist on helping, even when you refuse. But here's the paradox. By never asking, you never give anyone the chance to show up for you. And then their absence confirms your deepest fear, See? No one cares. I was right to never ask. And here is what people do and see when they admire your independence. They do and see you crying alone in your car after a terrible day, unable to call anyone because you don't want to burden them with your problems. They don't see you working yourself sick, taking on more than any human should carry, because asking someone to share the load feels impossible. They don't see the relationships that have suffered because you can never let anyone truly help you. The partners who said, "You won't let me in." The friends who stopped offering because you always say no. They don't see the bone-deep exhaustion of being your own everything. Your own support system, your own problem solver, your own safety net. The weight of never being able to rest because rest requires trust, and trust feels like a luxury you can't afford. They don't see that what looks like strength from the outside feels like survival from the inside. That you're not choosing independence, you're compelled toward it because the alternative feels impossible. Let's go deeper. Neuroscience research shows that chronic stress and isolation actually change your brain structure. The parts of your brain that process social connection and trust, like the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, become less active when you habitually refuse help and connection. Meanwhile, your amygdala, the fear center, becomes hyperactive. It's constantly scanning for threats, for signs that asking for help will lead to rejection, betrayal, or disappointment. So even when logically you know you need help, even when someone trustworthy offers it, your nervous system screams, "Danger! Don't do IT, IT's not safe," and you listen to that alarm, you deflect, you minimize. You handle it yourself. Because your brain has learned that the pain of struggling alone is more predictable, more manageable, than the risk of reaching out and being let down. But here's what's heartbreaking. Every time you refuse help, you reinforce that neural pathway. You teach your brain that you were right to be afraid. That isolation is safety, that self-sufficiency is survival. And the lonelier you become, the harder it is to reach out. The longer you go without asking, the more impossible asking feels. And this is where it gets painful. Because the person who never asks for help is caught in a terrible bind. You desperately want connection, but you can't allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to receive it. Think about it. Connection requires reciprocity. It requires letting others see your struggles, your needs, your humanity. It requires admitting that you're not invincible, not self-sufficient, not fine all the time. But you've spent so long being the strong one, the capable one, the one who needs nothing, that vulnerability feels like betrayal. Like admitting you've been lying all along. Like proving that you're weak after all. So you keep your struggles hidden. You present a polished surface. And people believe it because you're very, very good at pretending everything's fine. But underneath? Underneath, you're collapsing. And no one knows because you've made sure no one can see. And maybe that's the point. Maybe you refuse help not just because you don't trust others to provide it, but because you're terrified of what it would mean if they did. Terrified of owing them, of being indebted, of having to acknowledge that you needed something you couldn't give yourself, because needing makes you human. And somewhere along the way, you learned that being human messy, imperfect, dependent wasn't acceptable. Here's what happens over time. You become an island. People admire you from the shore, but no one really knows you. You have relationships, but they're all one-directional. You give, they receive. You solve their problems, but yours remain invisible. And the cost is devastating. Research on social isolation shows that chronic loneliness has health impacts equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It increases your risk of depression, anxiety, cardiovascular disease, even early death. But more than that, it robs you of one of the most fundamental human experiences, being known. Being seen in your struggle and loved anyway. Being vulnerable and discovering that vulnerability doesn't destroy you, it connects you. You miss out on the profound relief of sharing a burden. The warmth of mutual care. The intimacy that comes from letting someone see you at your worst and choosing to stay. All because asking feels impossible. All because somewhere along the way, you learn that needing makes you unworthy. But here's the thing, and this is important. You were never supposed to do this alone. Humans are fundamentally interdependent creatures. We evolved in tribes and communities and networks of mutual support. Our brains are literally wired for connection. We have entire neural systems dedicated to reading others' emotions, to coordinating with groups, to giving and receiving care. Self-sufficiency isn't your natural state. It's a trauma response. It's what happens when the people who were supposed to teach you that asking is safe That needing is normal, that vulnerability is strength. When those people failed you, and you adapted, you learned to survive without what you needed. You became your own everything. But survival isn't the same as thriving. And self-sufficiency isn't the same as strength. Real strength is knowing when you need help and having the courage to ask for it. Real independence is choosing when to be self-reliant and when to lean on others. Real power is being vulnerable enough to let people in. So, what do you do with this? How do you begin to change a pattern that feels like your entire identity? First, you need to understand that healing doesn't mean becoming dependent or helpless. It doesn't mean you stop being capable or that you burden everyone with every little problem. It means learning to distinguish between I can do this alone and I shouldn't have to do this alone. Start small. Practice asking for help with something tiny, something that doesn't feel life or death. Could you help me carry this? Would you mind looking at this for me? Notice the discomfort. Notice the fear, but also notice what actually happens. Most of the time people say yes. They help gladly. They don't think less of you. They don't hold it against you. In fact, they often feel closer to you for having been allowed to help. Because here's what you've forgotten. Letting someone help you is a gift to them too. It says, I trust you. I value you. I believe you're capable of supporting me. It creates connection. It builds intimacy. You're not a burden. You're a human being, and human beings need each other. And here's the radical truth you need to hear. You are not weak for needing help. You are not failing by admitting you can't do everything alone. You are not less valuable because you have needs. You are human. Beautifully, perfectly, messily human. And being human means sometimes you're strong and sometimes you need support. Sometimes you carry others and sometimes you need to be carried. Sometimes you have it together and sometimes you're falling apart. That's not a flaw. That's the human experience. The people who love you. They don't love you because you're self-sufficient. They don't value you because you never need anything. They love you, or they want to love you, because of who you are, not what you can do alone. But you have to let them. You have to take the risk. You have to say the terrifying words, I need help. I can't do this alone. Will you help me? And yes, sometimes people will say no. Sometimes they'll disappoint you. Sometimes they won't show up the way you need them to. But sometimes often, even they will. They'll say yes. They'll show up. They'll help. And you'll discover that the world doesn't end when you're vulnerable. It opens up. Because the psychology of someone who never asks for help isn't really about help at all. It's about a heart that learned too young that needing is dangerous. That vulnerability is weakness. That the only safe way to exist is to need nothing from no one. And that heart has been protecting you all these years. It's been keeping you safe the only way it knew how. But it's time to teach it something new. That safety isn't the absence of need. It's the presence of people who will hold you when you're falling apart.